Right, good afternoon. I have some scary things to tell to all of you. The internet is broken, just because BGP is broken. And BGP is broken because it's insecure. Really scary. So, a brief overview of why there is a perception in the industry why BGP is insecure, broken, and what to do about that. And this is something that is periodically showing up in IETF and then some other standards organizations. And what I would like to achieve with this is to present a problem space and to get some sense of the room, whether you see anything broken here and anything needs to be addressed and done. So the context. If we are talking about routing security and BGP security, there are two parts to that. The transport, which is today typically MD5 exclusively, and then the BGP information security, all sorts of origin path validation, BGP, SECAR, PKI family, and other interesting things there. There is a perception in the security community that MD5 is cryptographically broken, and it should not be used for anything practical. Yet, if today we have any form of authentication for BGP sessions, that's MD5. And whenever there is a new development or some extension of developments on a standard side, when security community sees that for a new shiny protocol, again, the security authentication is used for, MD5 is used for security authentication, they get really mad about that. So this is the context. This is not about the BGP information security. This is only about the MD5 aspect of that. BGP as such has been defined a long time ago in an environment where nobody cared too much about the security. Well, security did not exist as we understand that today, and it used for its transport whatever was available at that time. Layering on top of that for the BGP information security, it assumes that the transport provides some means for at least authentication to be able to prevent changing the path attributes, for example, for origin or path validation. So if we don't have sufficiently strong and credible transport security, can we really talk about BGP information security? So this is the core context of the discussion. How BGP interacts with transport? It's really trivial. It's just plain TCP, and it assumes that it just works. Attacks on the TCP layer are commodity, and anyone with some script and some spare time can make quite noticeable harm to the routing system. If we look from the security point of view, there needs to be a distinction made between authentication and confidentiality. BGP doesn't deal with confidentiality at all. Even if you think that you configure a password between your two pairs, then the information exchange gets encrypted. No, it doesn't. That's still clear on the wire. The only thing that happens is that there is a header added which signs the message being sent, and the other end can verify that it in fact came from you and that message was not tampered with. Back at the day when all these mechanisms were designed, the notion of graceful restart as such was only just starting. Today we see that universally deployed. And even if we have some disruption to the transport layer of BGP, graceful restart actually hides that to a rather large extent. And it may be perceived that it is no longer that much of the problem. On another aspect, even if you have perfect, both academically and practically perfect security mechanism, that does not solve the requirement for proper operational hygiene. If you have strong session authentication, but your BGP, but your nodes are open to incoming BGP sessions from the rest of the world, well, you probably have far bigger problems than weak authentication algorithm being used. Authentication for transport sessions is nothing new. It has been around for a while, and the working principle is very simple. It takes a TCP segment, calculates signature of it, and signature based on some shared secret, which is not on a wire, which is not exchanged between the two peers, and sends it out to the other side. The other side does the reverse, and if that doesn't match, well, that means that this segment was crafted or altered on the path. This does not provide confidentiality. This is not encryption. The only thing that it does, that it assures that the content was not modified in the path. And today, if we look from a practical perspective, most of the protection or the use cases are coming into the area of verifying that I'm still speaking to the same neighbor that I was speaking before the maintenance window started. It's something like a long and more reliable form of the peer identifier, not only the IP address and the autonomous system number, but something a little bit more strong. About available mechanisms for the session authentication. You certainly are not forced to use that, and the easiest one that works is certainly not to use anything at all. However, that's really easy to cause harm from the outside. What we use today is mostly exclusively TCP MD5 authentication option. That's been around for 20 years. Soon it will be an anniversary for that specification, and pretty much nothing has changed since. It was defined at a time where adding one additional octet into the protocol was considered to be costly. Therefore, the size of the option is 18 bytes, not 19 bytes, and therefore you cannot have any form of identification that you are changing the key. This is something that when you configure MD5 password secret or some other vendor syntax on your router, what happens underneath? There are certain extensions to that, and this is an attempt of several vendors to try to fix, especially the key rotation problem. However, that specification is not complete, and there are different groups of vendors which implement different subset of those, and at best what you can achieve is some partial interoperability after detailed validation. Of course, we do have an almost perfect, almost complete, and academically nice solution to that, which is called the TCP authentication option, which solves all of those problematic aspects, except of one. It exists only in theory. None of the vendors that have any significant market presence implement that. There used to be one, which now became history. And there are some vendor proprietary implementations trying to address this problem space. However, we cannot talk about any interoperability in that environment. If we look at operational reality, to have some cryptographically strong authentication mechanism is one thing. However, the problem space is slightly broader than only just that, and we have a set of operational practices accumulated over the years, which certainly offset the possible risks of an external attack. So, manipulation of the TTL, both to the minimum side and to the maximum side, applying proper filtering, and in general designing your network in the right way is certainly a viable solution, and this is what we see in deployment. Graceful restart made the problem of stray session reset be much less painful than it could have been. So the biggest problem is that after the session reset you don't have to resend all of your prefixes and rerun all of your policy. Again, you can just keep the state for some time once you recover. On the other hand, trying to develop a perfect security mechanism is not necessarily a substitute for proper network design and for proper operational hygiene. Even if you would have such a mechanism, if your platform is open to the external connections and it happens to react in such a way that each incoming BGP session request requires significant amount of resources load of resources on the platform, it might take on the order of a few hundred of such requests coming in to keep your large and big router completely unusable from BGP perspective. So if we try to look at the requirements for BGP transport security, 4 large areas start to emerge. First thing is that BGP sessions tend to be long-living, months or sometimes years. I'm not touching the area of trying to make a contest of whose session stays longest. That has rather negative aspects of not upgrading the software in a timely manner. The ability to select the algorithm which is considered to be cryptographically strong. So security community thinks that MD5 is not necessarily strong enough at this point in time. Even those algorithms which might be considered strong today, give it some time and that situation might change. So the mechanism is needed which allows to select what is considered good or what is available on your platforms. Then another large area of problematic aspects is the initial synchronization of the secret or a password. So how many times did you have to call the other part and tell the password over the phone or some other out-of-band mechanism, and if you try to change those and synchronize and so on. Probably it would be good that such a transport mechanism would have some mechanism to exchange the key in-band or semi-out-of-band with the BGP session itself. And also the ability to roll over from one key to the other without disrupting the session itself. If we look at the evolution of the transport, what is happening outside of the BGP, definitely we have TLS. TLS is all fine, it solves the problem, actually does much more than needed, except of the header authentication. TLS is not suitable if we want to try to prevent the stray reset attacks on BGP. The other aspect is that if we are using TLS with certificate-based key derivation, certificates have lifetime, the expiration time. And even if it might be that it is several years, well, if you really want several decades, that's still a finite amount of time. That means that at some point of time, there is a risk that your BGP session will have to be terminated. We can use IPsec. There are various options for that. All of them have the cost of complexity, and some of them have varying degrees of impact into the overall network design. For example, running that in tunnel mode comes to an interesting interaction of BGP over the tunnels, and you might have some. Well, overall, this increases the complexity. You need to take care that you don't learn your transport endpoint over that same tunnel. A new development in transport area is QUIC, and that seems to be one of the possible solutions. It's both authenticated and encrypted, and in fact, even the headers of the protocol are encrypted. So if you're really paranoid, you should be happy. However, if you run practical operational networks, probably you should be scared that you won't be able to see, and in case of a troubleshooting, that might raise a lot of questions. There's also MACsec on the lower layers. That might be an option. Again, depends on actual network design and overall environment where that operates. And of course, the most fun option is that we can invent a new transport protocol for BGP. That's just fun. So if we try to summarize the problem space, To have an ideal security mechanism is not a substitute for proper operational hygiene and for proper network design. And the problem space is actually larger than just one single protocol or some cryptographic mechanism. We mostly have a solution. It exists on paper or in theory. It is not implemented. It's TCP authentication option. None of the vendors implement that. There are some private deployments. So some of larger operators who tend to work with their own equipment do have implementations of this. However, this is not publicly available and not available on a generic hardware, generic platforms. If we look from a perspective, probably eventually BGP will run over quick, and this potentially will be addressed by having an underlying secure transport. However, it's still too early to talk about that. Quick is still in a phase of having too many changes and experimentation with that, and you also need to allow for a significant amount of time when vendors implement that in their platform. Certainly, we are not talking in a short period of time. So then, a question and initiation for the discussion. Do you care about this? Is this a problem for you? Do you see this as being important, or this is something that you are used to live with and it can just continue staying, especially if we have this discussion in the context of an approaching lunch, so whichever is more important, MD5 on BGP or a perspective of lunch. So back to the serious note, a discussion. A few of the questions on those topics discussed. So initial key synchronization, do you see a need for that? Is this something that would be of help in your operational environment? What about the long-lived sessions? If you need to reset that, say, every few years, is that a major problem? Key rotation, what mechanisms would you foresee for that? What about ability to select different signature algorithms, and what should they be? And what to do with TCP authentication options? Should you go and vote with your purchase order with the vendors, or we still continue thinking that we do have AO and that's it, that's fine. That's a nice academic experiment, but nothing more. And do we need to think about BGP running over any other alternative transports? So definitely I'm not raising a question whether we need to redesign a new BGP. I know some people in the room would be very happy to do that, but this question is not on the list. So with that, I would like to sense the feeling of the room, whether this is of any interest and something could be done.
How much more secure will I be if I do all of these things?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. How much more secure will I be if I do all of the things that you've discussed?
Probably not that much today, as we don't have BGP-SEC/RPKI as it was designed being anywhere near planned to be deployed. However, if that changes, you would be quite significantly. And the biggest aspect of that is that, again, security is not about the transport part, but about the information part. All the hijacks and all sorts of other high-value attacks are on the information security side. In order for that to be practical, you need to have credible transport for your BGP sessions.
Okay, so I don't agree with you on that. So, and I've got a presentation that I've got managed to find 10 minutes to explain why I think all of these would be a complete waste of time. Okay. And along with a load of other encryption technology that, frankly, is not really worth, doesn't really give you any security, just a kind of in your head you think it's secure and it's not. So watch my presentation later on. But I don't think anyone's, just trying to get MD5 rolled out was a nightmare. I don't think anyone's going to do this unless there's a very demonstrationable view that this gives me something I don't already have and that the risk is high. I think attacking the BGP control plane is absolutely a target, and we see it all the time. But I don't think any of these help with the sort of attacks that we're seeing today. I think that's the big issue. I do agree with you on TCP/AO. I think we should be pushing that much more. I think devices guys could help with that as well, not just on BGP LAN, but on other TCP platforms. But overall, in time, I don't think any of these will be that valuable, is my view. And I'll explain later why it's quite so you'll have to wait and watch.
Right, thank you.
Just quick question. I mean, there was a very similar session held in RIPE last week, again discussing AS hijacks. It seems to be something which the frequency of hijacks is increasing, especially in areas like the Middle East, and these are disruptive. In general terms, I would say that the Western European markets, North American markets, this is maybe not such a sensitivity. We are seeing a lot of operators whose entire businesses are being damaged and disrupted in other parts of the world. Is there a coordinated activity at a global level? I was starting to see all the different presentations at different network operator groups and so on, but it feels like we need a level of coordination at a global level. Is there anything you can say about how that conversation is going and where those requirements and studies are being published?
Well, what you are discussing is BGP information security, not the transport security as such. And yes, the value of the attacks lies in the information security side. There are theoretical solutions to that. They vary between being completely undeployable and unusable to semi-working. That is a fundamental problem that the BGP information security approach, which has been worked on for a long time, it was developed and designed in an environment which is quite far away from operational reality. Therefore, the solutions that we have, they are not necessarily usable. So now, if we are coming to the core of your question, whether there's any coordination about that, there are talks about that, and there are some movements about that. However, we do not have practically deployable, say, technology components for solving that. There is quite active work going on in trying to address that, and first thing, it will not going to be quick and easy. This area is quite complex. The other thing is we start to see certain split in the operations community. There are two large opinions. One is that we do have BGP second theory. We spent over a decade working on that. Maybe we should continue this effort. Even if it is hardly usable, we should try and at least to gain operational experience and do incremental fixes to that. The second approach is leave it as a failed experiment, and now knowing the outcome of that experiment, define something new, much simpler than that, which solves probably 90% of possible hijacks, but which is practically applicable, practically deployable, and deployable within a short period of time.
I guess one of the things that I sort of would really welcome to see building into the conversation would also be the aspects of social engineering that allow these exploits to be affected, because even with full implementation of what you're saying, even with additional technical solutions in place, social engineering exploits are actually often how these things are unlocked. Yeah, I would welcome the chance to sort of have a holistic view on it.
Okay.
Hello, Thomas Mangan, LINX Networks. On the, I will say, layer 2 protection or the packet protection, Quick is great. When it's out, hopefully it should be easy to convert any protocol to it. TCP Quick, it's an easy thing. For the other subject, the issue is that the implementation of security is often complex. And if you want things to be done, it must be simple. And I think the operational complexity are what holding people, because it's easy to break. If something goes wrong, you must be able to fix it. So I think there is a lot of resistance to change, because for many people, the impact of the, whilst we have very visible case of hijacking, which affect larger business, for most people, those are irrelevant problems.
Yes, exactly the simplicity aspect of implementation. So if we are comparing Quick versus AO, guess one which is much more simpler and easier to implement from vendors.
Thank you, Ignas.
Thank you.
Thank you.